Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are honored to have Stephen Purdy joining us here today live as the owner and operator of Purdy Funeral Service, based out of Dover and Lee, New Hampshire. He joins us today to talk more about the family-owned and operated business and, of course, how he's helping so many. So first and foremost, welcome to the show today. How are you, Stephen?
I am wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Excited to get to talk to you because, a lot of us have to deal with death, deal with funerals. And as a person who has lost my mother, lost loved ones, I think we all can relate. This is a very big part of life, and it's something that needs to be discussed. And I wish more people were able to discuss this, earlier while they're alive, right? Because it's always good to know people's plans because dying is part of life, and that's how I describe it. And I know it's a very sensitive subject to many, and I know you are also compassionate with 4 generations under your belt with helping so many
Yeah.
families with the grieving process. I commend you on that because I know it's not not an easy business to be in.
Yeah, it's a demanding business to say the least. You kind of hit the nail on the head right off the bat about planning for things. We know we're all going to pass away. Doesn't it make sense that we plan ahead for these things? We plan ahead for birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, because we know they're going to happen, so we plan ahead for them. So, like death and taxes, we should plan for those as well, right?
Yep, and the majority of the time, most people don't. Well,
Right.
I'm glad you're here helping people, and it's purdyfuneralservice.com. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
That's Purdy funeralservice.com. So tell us a little bit about the company.
Well, like you mentioned, we're 4 generations. So it started with my great grandfather. He bought our original location in Dover, I think during the Depression. He started working for another gentleman that was in town back in the 1800s. So it kind of really all started back in the 1800s with my great grandfather, working in the business, then eventually, purchasing his own. So that's a little brief history. My family's just, been in the community, for all those generations. So we're well known. And I think that's important, being well known in the community, being family owned and operated. There's a big shift in the industry now with a lot of, corporate entities coming into the game of funeral service and buying up a lot of privately owned funeral homes around us. So, I really like to boast the fact that we're still family owned and operated. So, when you want that mom and pop feel, someone in the community that you know and recognize, that's us. We're here for you for that.
Beautiful. Well, let me go back to you growing up as a kid, right? I was reading, I know you were always scared of losing your father. We're all scared of that, right? Um, you know, and who in your family, decided to follow in the footsteps and go into the business? Obviously, you did.
Yeah. Yeah. I was never really groomed to be in in the business. My parents never, forced me in this direction. Again, like you'd mentioned, as a kid growing up, going through elementary school, I had a lot of friends. I knew a lot of people that, came from, a single parent family, whether there was a death in the family or, it was through a divorce. And I always felt lucky and fortunate that I always had my 2 parents. And, I don't know, for, early on, I was just deathly afraid of, oh my God, what would ever happen if I lost my father? And then, as a teenager growing up, you realize how much your father does for you.
Mhm.
The vacations that we've been on, the things that we have, the house that we live in. What would happen if he passed right now? What's going to happen to the funeral home? Who's going to take care of us? Um, I went to school for something totally different than funeral service to begin with.
What was that?
I was going to be a conservation officer. I'm an avid outdoorsman, so I thought I'd go to school to be a hunter and a fisherman, basically. But after graduating college, I'm like, I'm going to step my foot in the family business, go to school, get my license, and let's just see where that leads us. If at least we'll have a family member in line to take over the business if the inevitable should happen. Thank God it never did. I'm 50 years old and my father's in his upper 70s. He's still with us. Doesn't work in the business really anymore. But every now and then he might come in and help out with visiting hours if it's a family that he knows. But yeah, I still have both my parents. So luckily I never had to face my fears as a young child. And so as I got my funeral license, here I am 30 years later.
God bless. Amazing. And just curious, growing up in a home where, death is part of life and this is the family business, were you more prone to being open to the death, or was it still scary as a child for you? Just the concept of dying, just curious.
Yeah, no, I've always been afraid of it and still am.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just a curse of being a funeral director. You see it all the time. And it's not, people in their 80s and 90s that pass away.
No,
It's all ages,
that's got to be the hardest.
and
Seeing
of
the young
course, it's
children. Mhm.
yeah, right. Oh, that's the worst when you have someone young. But, geez, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 60s, you name it, those deaths occur and sometimes are more frequent than you'd like to believe. And boy, every time your heart skips a beat, it's like, oh my God, is this it?
Yeah. But
Do
it
I have
must,
everything lined up in case I
yeah,
should die tonight? Do I have my life
exactly.
insurance?
But it must have given you, and it gives you such compassion and empathy for these families that need someone who's been around this, who's understanding, who's, empathetic of the situation. Because, that's when people are, lost, they come to you for direction. And I'll be honest, when my mom passed away 7 years ago, right before she passed, she had cancer. We started visiting some funeral homes. I live on Long Island in New York, and just, I got a bad vibe from one funeral director in general, just to be honest, a little pompous, a little
Mhm.
didn't seem like he cared. And I know it's mundane because it's everyone has a job, it's mundane, but didn't make us feel like it's going to be okay when mom passes. We're here. We're like, just, it was more like, yeah, it's okay. Yep. So let me just get to the numbers and this is how it's going to work when she goes. And it was just very, just very crude. And
Yeah.
I could just tell by talking to you within a few minutes that you have that compassion. And I think that's important to people like me and community members that are coming in those doors in the grieving process who are looking for someone's guidance, help, and empathy during this difficult time.
Well, absolutely. I don't think, this job is cut out for everyone. I think we're all directed in a certain path, for who we are and what we can do. Um, yes, you have to be empathetic.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that empathy not only comes from just my personality, but again, being family owned and operated, you're looking at the director that runs the show. So I have a vested interest
Yeah.
on what people think of me and my business. I'm not just collecting a paycheck working for someone else and, I'm just here clocking in and out 9 to 5. Maybe that's what you might get with a firm that's not family owned and operated. So, I always like to boast that,
Yeah.
you're dealing with someone who wants to be here and feels the need to be here for the community.
Beautiful. And just to point out, you have two locations, correct? One 655 Central Avenue in Dover. This is New Hampshire. Two
Yep,
Concord Road in Lee, New Hampshire.
that's right.
And also, um, you are 24/7 business. How does that part work, right? Because people are passing away in the middle of the night. What is
Yeah.
the process and the communication and your staff? I'm sure you have a very trusted, confident, well-respected staff that are helping families there all the time.
Yes, I get good compliments from my group of guys that go out and make the transfers, when a death occurs. It's taken me a number of years to grow a network of individuals, employees, part-timers, that I can call on when those deaths come in, when I'm in bed sleeping, if I'm doing, on a family vacation or out to dinner with my wife. For many years I had to escape, dinner. Geez, I gotta go. I have a death
Make that
call. I gotta go make a
sacrifice.
removal.
Yeah.
So I've got, great staff that work for me, both in the office and part-timers that help out with those removals. thank God for cell phones. This is my business, away from the office. I don't always have to be in the office. As long as people can reach me, I can appropriate, the staff to help out, these individuals. So yeah, it is 24/7. You never know, there is no holiday in funeral
Yeah.
service. There is no
Hmm.
weekends in funeral service.
Yeah. Now, in New Hampshire, is there any specific counties in particular that you're working in? And do you also do out-of-state transfers as well for those that need to bring their loved ones home or to, your state?
Yeah, so we deal with quite a few out of state stuff. I mean, we're kind of close. We're very close to the border of Maine. We're
Yep.
close to the border of Massachusetts. So, there's big hospitals that are in Boston. So, we have quite a few families that experience a death out of state because they're in a specialty hospital and we're assisting with those transfers interstate. Not everyone dies here in New England.
Yeah.
We might have a death that occurred, down in Florida. I've handled handled a death years ago from Hong Kong. I was wondering how that was going to work
Wow.
out with the
Yeah.
communication. I couldn't
Right.
recall much of the details of the communication. It was so long ago, but yeah, we, dealt with some international transfers to Indonesia a couple times. Um, so yeah, it happens, but most of the, interstate stuff, however you want to say it, is between our bordering states, Maine and Massachusetts.
Beautiful. And then I also wanted to point out and talk a little bit about the cremation process because I know you actually own your own crematory and not every funeral home does. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so God, in the year 2000 is when we built our crematory.
Okay.
Back then, cremation was just kind of up and coming. This was all my father's taking at the time. He recognized that,
Man of it, I
cremation.
he
That's
was
right.
able to see it ahead
Yeah.
like that. That's great.
So, he was seeing the
Visionary, we
trend in
call him.
cremation.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided, hey, we need to build our own crematory. I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
let's do it. At the time, there weren't many crematories in the state. I think we were one of 12 or 13 at the time.
Wow.
So, that really helped set us apart from other funeral service providers because now with our own crematory, your loved one, think about this for a second. Your loved one stays in our care 100% of the time. We're not relying on a third party. We're not picking up mom and
Yeah.
then keeping her at our facility and then transferring to another facility that someone else owns and operates. And how are they dealing with the identity of the body and custody and all that? So that's been, a game changer for us. And not
Okay.
only that, but we were basically paying ourselves to do the cremation, not paying someone else.
Got it. Well, let me ask you, let's talk about the trend in cremation. I from what I know, family and friends, I'm finding out that there's a lot more cremations happening than burials. And you as an expert in the field, help me out because one thing that I always say is there really enough land to still bury our loved ones out there? So can you enlighten us on, 2024 and the statistics with, burials compared to cremations and how it's working, especially in your state?
Yeah. So let me address one of the last things you mentioned about is there enough land? Everyone always says that to me. That is the least of anyone's worry. No one who's pre-planning their funeral ever says, geez, I don't think there's going to be enough land for me. I want to be cremated. So,
Okay, like I feel like funeral homes, they're running at least,
yeah.
well, at least I'm like,
But
in Long Island, but New York City area, they're all like they're sold out. Does that make sense?
Oh,
But
well, you're true
like
there. I've
they're
I've
full.
been I've been to a cemetery down on Long Island, and they don't bury one next to each other. The grave was actually 4 graves deep.
Wow.
It was an enormous hole in the ground to do a burial there. It was incredible. So maybe that is
I
a
don't
concern
know.
in some bigger areas, bigger population areas like that. But I think the main thing for a lot of people, the trend towards cremation is number one, cost.
Yeah.
It's it's a lot less expensive to do, say, a simple cremation versus a full traditional burial where you have an open casket, visiting
Yeah.
hours. You've got, all those service fees, use of facilities and cemetery fees. You can do a basic cremation, with no services, and you don't have to bury. If you don't have a cemetery lot, you're in no rush to go out and buy one. I think nowadays people don't plan ahead for these things like they did, 30, 40, 50 plus years ago. Back in the day, probably, back in the, say, the 1950s, I bet a lot of families, when they got married, one of the first things they did is, oh, we got to go buy a cemetery plot.
Yeah,
Nobody does that
yeah.
anymore.
I
They don't
know,
do it
I
until they
know.
experience a death, right?
Yeah.
So, 30 years ago when I started in the business, I'd say our cremation rate was maybe 25, 30%. Most of what we did, the body was embalmed, prepared for, visiting hours, funeral mass the next day, off to the cemetery for burial. You had multiple sets of visiting hours. Before I came on board, my father, when he was running it and I was a kid, they always did 2 days of visiting hours and several time periods each day. I mean, it was a week-long event, right, for a funeral. Nowadays, that cremation rate has shifted from roughly 25% to about 85 to 90% cremation.
Oh my
So a
goodness.
huge swing. When we meet with a family and they say they want a full traditional burial now, it almost catches us off guard. It's like, what? You want a full service? Because we're just
Yeah.
so used to, cremation. Now, not all areas of the country are like that, but it seems like the four corners, northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest corners of the country all have high cremation rates for some reason.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
but
Yeah.
with cremation, there's a lot of option. You don't have to do a service. We can just do the cremation, hand ashes back to you. You can decide to have a memorial service after the cremation's done. You can still have an open casket, full blown, memorial service, visiting hours, wake with an open casket, and then cremation is done after the services. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
there's
my
lots of ways.
goodness. Well, at this time, let's remind everyone how we can reach out to you. Could you share the website, phone number, any form of contact?
Yeah. So again, the website is purdyfuneralservice.com. Our phone numbers are on there. I could probably blurb out our phone number, but no one's going to hear it. So purdyfuneralservice.com, the phone numbers are on there. My name's Steven. They can look me up there.
All right, great. Well, also, I know on your sheet you want to talk a little about pet cremation for today. And we still have 5 minutes left in the show, a little
Sure.
longer. Wait. So this is great too, because you're really taking care of all family members' needs. This is great because I live on Long Island, and I don't know if you're in the business, you may have heard of. Do you remember about 30 years ago, there was this whole controversy on Long Island? It was the pet cemetery, and the Janet Jackson came out here, Latoya Jackson, and there was a big uproar because the funeral home owners and crematory did not do the right thing. They were
Uh,
taking people's pets, and if you Google it, it's like from the 80s or 90s, maybe
yeah.
longer. But anyway, did the wrong thing. People were outraged knowing that they were getting back, cremations that weren't even their animals. They were
Uh,
mixed. They weren't being buried properly. It was like such a disaster, right? And I've lost pets, and I just last year lost one, and now it's owned by somebody else. It's great. We did a private cremation for my cat. Um,
yeah.
but it's great because I don't know any dual funeral home that's doing pets and people. I think it should. This is a great. Is this normal in New Hampshire, or is this something that's unique to you and to your company?
No, so it's pretty unique to us. I only know, I think, one other, maybe two other funeral homes in New Hampshire that offer pet cremation. Um, Boy, I could talk to you for hours about pet cremation, but I
Well,
like
we
what you
if we're
said.
talking again, we definitely can. Do we have another show?
Well, not scheduled yet, but
Okay,
but
okay,
perhaps we will now.
okay, great.
But I like what you said that you scheduled the private cremation, so it sounds like you went directly to a pet crematory.
Correct. The one that had all the controversy years ago, which is now
Right.
run under, but it's strictly pets only now
So
and
so even
trustworthy.
even if you go to your veterinarian, because they're going to handle the cremation for you, you should ask the veterinarian who's doing the cremation, where are they located? Have you seen their facility? Do you know how they operate? Do you know how they do things? These are questions veterinarians should know. You know, if you lost your mom at the hospital, they're not shipping your mom to a crematory that you've never heard of. You're making the choice, right? So no one can tell you where your pet's going to go for cremation. It is your choice. So I encourage everyone to do their due diligence and just, Google pet cremation, pet crematory, see who's around you and call those places and look at their website, see what maybe has the best feel for them.
Yeah.
Because yes, there has been a lot of controversy over pet cremation, like you had mentioned. That is not
Yeah.
the only case. There are many other cases you could search up, where they're doing group cremations and then
Yeah.
they're just divvying up ashes into urns and oh, okay, this is a cat. This is about much ashes that would probably be in that cat urn. We're going to give that to that pet owner. And and people are getting scammed. It doesn't happen everywhere, but there are cases of it, and they are documented.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But the fact you're taking everyone's pets and taking care of them too, because they are part of family members, right?
Absolutely. And the big thing for me, to boast about pet cremation with me is, funeral service were heavily regulated when it comes to human
Yep.
cremation. So we just took those same standards of rules and regulations and applied them
Beautiful.
to pets. There's no governing agency over pet cremation. So who's better at taking care of your furried loved one than a funeral home, right?
Beautiful. Absolutely. Someone who's especially well trusted in the community. And, it's like you mentioned, fourth generation. I think that's beautiful. And,
Yeah. Thank you.
there's still a lot that we have here, on our sheet to talk about. Did you want to talk, a little bit more about, the work you're doing, about your family? And just curious, you have children as well?
Yeah, I got three kids. They're 16, 18, and 20.
Are any of them in the
Um,
business yet?
and they're kids. They still all live at home.
Yay!
And
Mine are 7 and 9. But is anyone
but
now following in the next footstep as well?
well, my oldest two are definitely out. If there was any hope for any one of them, it would be my youngest one.
Okay.
I've got I got two nieces as well, but they're in their own things as well. So who knows? There could be a fifth generation with their youngest child. They're all into their own different things, and between dirt bikes and cars and cheerleading, they all have their own hobbies.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And what do you love most about the work you do?
So when it comes to the funeral home, I think the thing that I flourish the most on is meeting with families. When you're a funeral director in most states, you have a dual license. You're an embalmer and a funeral
Mm-hmm.
director. I always look at myself, I am a funeral director. I'm not a great embalmer. I have someone else do that for me
Mm-hmm.
who's really good at it.
Oh my
I'm a
goodness.
good funeral director. I like to meet with families. I like to talk with them. I just have, I'm kind of like my father. He has the gift of gab, and I can sit down and talk with anyone. I could, you could be homeless, you could be the president of the United States, or anyone in between. I can just always
Yeah.
find something in common or something to talk about.
That's beautiful. I have a nephew who, I'll say he's special needs, and he is like the mayor of the town. He's the most kindest, politest, and he always comes and greets people. So the joke in the family is that he's going to be a funeral director, or at least his first job. He'll be greeting guests. He's always, "How are you? How's your mom? How's your dad? How are you feeling? I'm sorry for your loss." He's just so compassionate, and it's something that's within my family. We just are very kind, generous people, but I feel like my nephew's going to go into your field. And even he was 10, I guess, when my mom passed away. But like I'm everyone's afraid of death, but not really. Like I promised my mom I would do her makeup when she passed. So I marched into that funeral home. I said, with my kids, my family, I said, "This is it. This is grandma. This is her. She's dead. This is her body. It's just her case. Now watch mommy do her makeup." So not everybody is as, like open with the idea of touching a dead one or a
Yeah,
dead
right.
body or being around it. But
Yeah.
I embrace it. I think it's a part of life. I think it's sadly beautiful. It's just, our shell in a sense. And I hope, just by speaking about this today, that people can become more aware of, and it's okay. It's a part of life. But the one thing I think I'm going to ask you that I've learned from losing and people who've lost, and you're around the business of people losing, is to live your day, each and every day to the fullest, right? Because you never
That
know when it's going to be your last. And
that
that's,
is right. I've met
oh,
countless families over the years, the death of a husband. Oh, he just retired 2 weeks ago, and here we are doing his funeral. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. It's sad. So yeah, enjoy life every day. Live every day.
yeah, live it like it's a Tim McGraw song. I don't know if you like country music, but it's called Live Like You Were Dying.
Yeah, it's country's starting to grow on me the older I get.
Oh, good. Well, I have an uncle who's about to pass away. He's over in Amish town. He's in Pennsylvania right now, and his three daughters, my cousins, are there holding his hand. And it's, he's with hospice. It's going to happen any day. And I just keep telling them, I did this with my mother. It's part of life. It's going to be okay, as hard as it is. But you know
Mhm.
what? It's something we all should prepare for. And I love how communication, you say, is key, right? And
Right.
you mentioned your dad always said you attract more flies with honey than you do with shit. So God bless Dad. I love him.
That's
He's
right.
he's great. I checked out his bio on the website before too. And gosh, we're out of time. How do we reach out to you? One more time, tell us the phone number and the website, please, Stephen.
Yeah, phone number 603-742-1017 and the website purdyfuneralservice.com.
Thank you so much. You have a fantastic day. Pleasure getting to know you. And thank you for being an amazing owner and operator of this family business. And don't forget 2 locations, everyone. We'll be back with more. Have a great day. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Stephen. Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.